I opened some of the bottles, smelled them, and put the stoppers to my lips. If I had wanted to use anything save narcotic medicines that were poisons in themselves, I would not have administered any of those. "Do you doubt them?" asked the younger brother. "You see, monsieur, I'm going to use them." I replied and said no more. I made the patient swallow with great difficulty, and after many efforts, the dose that I desired to give. As I intended to repeat it after a while, and as it was necessary to watch its influence, I then sat down by the side of the bed. There was a timid and suppressed woman in attendance, wife of the man downstairs, who had retreated into a corner. The house was damp and decayed, indifferently furnished, evidently recently occupied and temporarily used. Some thick old hangings had been nailed up before the windows to deaden the sound of the shrieks. They continued to be uttered in their regular succession, with the cry, "My husband, my father, and my brother," the counting up to 12, and "Hush." The frenzy was so violent that I had not unfastened the bandages restraining her arms, but I had looked to them to see that they were not painful. The only spark of encouragement in the case was that my hand upon the sufferer's breast had this much soothing influence, that for minutes at a time it tranquilized the figure. It had no effect upon the cries. No pendulum could be more regular. For the reason that my hand had this effect, I assume, I had sat by the side of the bed for half an hour, with the two brothers looking on, before the elder said, "There is another patient." I was startled and asked, "Is it a pressing case?" "You had better see," he carelessly answered, and took up the light. The other patient lay in a back room across a second staircase, which was a species of loft over a stable. There was a low, plastered ceiling to a part of it. The rest was open to the ridge of the tiled roof, and there were beams across. Hay and straw were stored in that portion of the place, faggots for firing, and a heap of apples in the sand. I had to pass through that part to get to the other. My memory is circumstantial and unshaken. I try it with these details, and I see them all, in this my cell in the Bastille near the close of the 10th year of my captivity, as I saw them all that night. On some hay in the ground, with a cushion thrown under his head, lay a handsome peasant boy, a boy of not more than 17 at the most. He lay on his back with his teeth set, his right hand clenched on his breast, and his glaring eyes looking straight upward. I could not see where his wound was as I kneeled one knee over him, but I could see that he was dying of a wound from a sharp point. "I am a doctor, my poor fellow. Let me examine it." "I do not want it examined," he answered. "Let it be." It was under his hand, and I soothed him to let me move his hand away. The wound was a sword thrust, received from 20 to 24 hours before, but no skill could have saved him if it had been looked at without delay. He was then dying fast. As I turned my eyes to the elder brother, I saw him looking down at this handsome boy whose life was ebbing out, as if he were a wounded bird or hare or rabbit, not at all as if he were a fellow creature. "How has this been done, monsieur?" said I. "A crazed young common dog, a serf, forced my brother to draw upon him, and has fallen by my brother's sword, like a gentleman." So here we find out that the older of the twins tells us that his brother was, quote unquote, forced to mortally wound this young peasant boy. Now, for clarification, I'll go ahead and let you know, the one that Minette continues to call elder, the elder brother, is the Marquis Saint Evermond, who we've met. The younger brother, the Marquis' twin brother, is Charles Darnay's father. Picking up with there was no touch of pity, sorrow, or kindred humanity in this answer. The speaker seemed to acknowledge that it was inconvenient to have that different order of creature dying there, and that it would have been better if he had died in the usual obscure routine of his vermin kind. He was quite incapable of any compassionate feeling about the boy, or about his fate. The boy's eyes had slowly moved to him as he had spoken, and they now slowly moved to me. "Doctor, they are very proud, these nobles. But we common dogs are proud too sometimes. They plunder us, outrage us, beat us, kill us, but we have a little pride left sometimes. Have you seen her, Doctor?" The shrieks and the cries were audible there, though subdued by the distance. He referred to them as if she were lying in our presence. I said, "I have seen her." "She is my sister, Doctor. They have had their shameful rights, these nobles, in the modesty and virtue of our sisters, many years, but we have had good girls among us. I know it, and have heard my father say so. She was a good girl. She was betrothed to a good young man too, a tenant of his. We were all tenants of his, that man who stands there. The other is his brother, the worst of a bad race." It was with the greatest difficulty that the boy gathered bodily force to speak, but his spirit spoke with a dreadful emphasis. "We were so robbed by that man who stands there, as all we common dogs are by the superior beings, taxed by him without mercy, obliged to work for him without pay, obliged to grind our corn at his mill, obliged to feed scores of his tame birds on our wretched crops, and forbidden for our lives to keep a single tame bird of our own, pillaged and plundered to the degree that when we chanced to have a bit of meat, we ate it in fear, with the door barred and the shutters closed, that his people should not see it and take it from us. I say we were so robbed and hunted and were made so poor that our father told us it was a dreadful thing to bring a child into the world, and that what we should most pray for was that our women might be barren and our miserable race die out. I had never before seen the sense of being oppressed bursting forth like fire. I had supposed that it must be latent in the people somewhere, but I had never seen it break out until I saw it in the dying boy. Nevertheless, Doctor, my sister married. He was ailing at the time, poor fellow, and she married her lover that she might tend and comfort him in our cottage, our dog hut, as that man would call it. She had not been married many weeks when that man's brother saw her and admired her and asked that man to lend her to him, for what are husbands among us? He was willing enough, but my sister was good and virtuous and hated his brother with a hatred as strong as mine. What did the two then to persuade her husband to use his influence with her to make her willing? The boy's eyes, which had been fixed on mine, slowly turned to the looker-on, and I saw in the two faces that all he said was true. The two opposing kinds of pride confronted one another. I can see, even in this Bastille, the gentleman's all negligent indifference, the peasant's all trodden down sentiment and passionate revenge. You know, Doctor, that it is among the rights of these nobles to harness us common dogs to carts and drive us. They so harnessed him and drove him. You know that it is among their rights to keep us in their grounds all night, quieting the frogs in order that their noble sleep may not be disturbed. They kept him out in the wholesome mist at night and ordered him back into the harness in the day. But he was not persuaded, no. Taken out of harness one day at noon to feed, if he could find food, he sobbed 12 times, once for every stroke of the bell, and died on her bosom. So what we find out here from this dying boy is that the Marquis's brother, Charles Darnay's father, came into the village and saw this woman and thought that she was very pretty and wanted her for his own. And we won't go into details about what that means. And she's married, and he goes to his brother, the Marquis, and says, "I want to borrow her." And the Marquis says, "Okay, go talk to the husband." And the husband says, "No, this is not something I'm willing to do." And so in order to convince him, they harness him to a cart like a bull or a horse, and they drive him around the estate, pulling this cart all day. And then that night, they keep him up, awake, don't allow him to go to sleep. The next morning, they do the same, tying him to the cart, making him drag it around. And finally, after all of that, he goes home, he sobs 12 times, and then he dies on his wife's chest. And so that is what we have just learned led up to the situation with the brother and the sister. Picking up with nothing. Nothing human could have held life in that boy but his determination to tell all his wrong. He forced back the gathering shadows of death as he forced his clenched right hand to remain clenched and to cover his wound. Then, with that man's permission, and even with his aid, his brother took her away in spite of what I know she must have told his brother. And what that is will not be long unknown to you, doctor, if it is now. His brother took her away for his pleasure and diversion for a little while. I saw her pass me on the road. When I took the tidings home, our father's heart burst, but never spoke one of the words that filled it. I took my young sister. Oh, hold on. So what we find out here, so her husband dies. Now when this young boy comes home to tell his family what has happened to his sister, his father has a heart attack and dies. I took my young sister, for I have another, to a place beyond the reach of this man, and where at least she will never be his vassal. So they have a younger sister, and he takes her away from their home, and he where she will never be under the authority of the Evermonds. Then I tracked the brother here, and last night climbed in, a common dog, but sword in hand. Where's the loft window? It was somewhere here. We're going to stop there for just a second.